This week's Parsha class on Parshas Shemos is brought to you by the Intentional Jew Podcast Network. Check them out at intentionaljew.com. And please remember to like and subscribe to the video.
Great, awesome idea on this week's Parsha. It's something that unless you've heard it before, there's a little shocking thing in the beginning of this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha is called, the Parsha and the Sefer is called Sefer Shemos, the Book of Names. The Book of Names. So the book opens, Eila Shemos, these are the names of the souls that came down to Egypt with Jacob, and it tells us their names. It tells us with Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, it tells the names of the tribes of Israel. And then read on in the Parsha, and you'll see something unbelievable, something striking. There are no names. In the beginning of the book of Shemos, in the book of names, there are no names. There are many pronouns, but there are no names. When we talk about the parents of Moshe and of Aaron and Miriam, it says a man from the house of Levi took a daughter of Levi. And it doesn't identify them until much later, Amram and Miriam. When it talks about the two incredible Jewish ladies who really saved the Jewish people, and the whole exodus of Egypt happened because of them and the encouragement that they gave the nation. They're not called by their names, Miriam and Yocheved. They're called by nicknames, Shifra and Pua. Moshe in the beginning is not referred to by a name. He's called the Nar. He's called the child or the Yeled. The daughter of Paro is called the Bas Paro. The new king is called Vayakam Melech Chadash al Mitzrayim. A new king arose on Egypt. Two guys are fighting. It says Shnei Anosim Nitzim. Two guys are fighting. These two guys are the diabolical duo of Dasan and Aviram, and yet they're not identified. Isn't it unbelievable? Nobody is identified. There are no names in the beginning of the book of Shemos. Now we find out who all these people are. Later in the second and the third chapter, we find out their names. But in the beginning, there are no names. What's that about? I'll tell you another truly incredible thing. Yocheved has her first child at 130 years old. Now, it happens to be a Rashi, brings it down that she was 130 years old. And you have to imagine, remember Sarah had her first child at 90? And the Torah went bananas? Like, whoa, it was 130 years old, she has a baby. That's child's play. Yocheved was 90 years old. I'm sorry, she had a baby. That's child's play. Yocheved was 130 years old. You want to talk about a magic trick? That's like unbelievable. 130 years old. I don't care how old people were living. That's old. Yeah, 130, and she has her first baby, and we know nothing about it. We don't make a big issue out of it. We make a big issue out of Sarah, but not out of Yocheved. What's going on? Batya, the daughter of Paro. She goes down to the Nile. Most people don't know, I should say it this way. The Medrash says that when she went down to the Nile, the reason she was going down to the Nile was because she was converting. She was using the Nile as a mikvah, and that's why it says that her maidservants were standing by the side and watching. They didn't want to participate in this. They had no interest in changing over to the God of the Jewish people, to monotheism. And that's what she was doing. She's standing in the water, and she hears a baby crying. And the baby's crying. Rashi explains in a very, very strange way. It's a baby that's crying, but it's a very thick voice, and it sounds like an older child. You can tell the difference between a young baby and infant. I'm surrounded by infants. It's like you can tell the sound of the infant very different than the kvetching of a 2-year-old child. And this baby, this young lad that was in this basket, was crying in a very odd way. She says she heard the na'ar boche, the na'ar crying, which, by the way, just is a beautiful sight. I think I've mentioned it before. It's a very, very favorite understanding of mine. But when it says the na'ar boche, and then she exclaimed, "Oh, that's a Jewish child." So the way that most commentaries understand is because the voice was like so weird, it was so unique and different that she understood there was something strange going on here, and this must be a Jewish kid. But there are others that say the na'ar boche was not referring to Moshe. The na'ar bocha, the child who was crying, was referring to Aaron. Aaron was standing by, frightened for his little brother, just like Miriam was watching. The Torah tells us that Miriam was there. Aaron was there also. He was a young lad, Aaron, a little child. But he was crying, he was bawling because he was worried about his brother. When she saw a brother crying for a brother, she knew that's Miyal De'ivim. This is a Jewish kid. If a brother can care for a brother like that, that's a Jewish quality. That must be a Jewish kid. Meantime, she wants to get the basket. So it says, Vatishlach es hamasa. Simple understanding. Vatishlach es hamasa. She sent her maidservant. Rashi, the Medrash, says, Vatishlach es hamasa. An amma is a hand's breadth. From the tip of the top of the finger until the elbow, which is approximately 18 inches. And that's a measure in the Torah called an amma. And it's a very common measure. We use it in a lot of calculations. So when it says Vatishlach es hamasa, it means that she sent her arm, she sent her hand out to go and to get the baby. The Medrash says that her hand extended some 16 amos, some incredible amount. You're talking about something like 24 feet. It extended to be able to get the thing. So clearly a miracle happened. But what was in her mind? Vatishlach es hamasa, your hand can reach, what do you got to span? A couple of feet. How did she think she was going to get something that was 24 feet away from her? How did she know her hand was going to stretch out like Inspector Gadget, right? That she was going to be able to have this, the hand was going to go and she was going to be able to pull in this basket. Like, what did she even think? It's not like you're looking and you say, I'm going to really try to do that. You can't do that. It's just physically not possible. So why was she sending her hand out? What does it mean, Vatishlach es hamasa? Okay, so I'm going to tell you something very, very beautiful. The Ramban and many other commentaries speak about the concept of the difference between Sefer Bereishis and Sefer Shemos. Sefer Bereishis, the book of Bereishis, what we just finished, was the book of roots. It was the Sefer HaYashar, the book of the upright, the book of the sterling and the stunning individuals that make up the Jewish people. It's about the roots of the Jewish nation. It's about Chesed of Avram. It's about the strength of Yitzchak. It's about the emes, the truth of Yaakov. It's about the Shivtei Ka, about the tribes, their trials and tribulations, their development as individuals, as Yehuda, as Reuven, as Shimon and Levi. And every single story becomes important because we understand who we are. We understand the Shimon that we have inside of us, the Reuven that we have inside of us, the bit of Yaakov, of Avram, of Yitzchak, of who we are in our very essential makeup, which is critical to us. We need to know that when we change our lives, in the middle of our lives, we got that from Avram Avinu. We need to know that when we're willing to give up our lives for what we believe in, we got that from Avram and from Yitzchak. We need to know that when we are tied to truth and we live by truth, we got that from Yaakov. We need to know what our identity is. We need to know who we are. And that's the book of Bereishis. The book of Bereishis is setting down the foundations of the Jewish people, and therefore every single thing that every single individual did, we can recognize in ourselves. It became part of our Jewish genetic code. Who Sarah was, and who Rivka was, who Rachel was, who Leah was. The fact that we are able to grow up in such outrageous times and yet still hold on to who we are and what we believe in is attributable to two individuals by the name of Ephraim and Manasseh. That they were able to grow up in Egypt totally devoid and separated from the rest of their relatives, the rest of their examples and paradigms, and they were able to grow up to be such magnificent human beings. Yisim chalakim k'Ephraim k'Manasseh. We give that bracha to our children. To grow up knowing their strength, grow up knowing, having an identity, who they are. Individuals in the book of Bereishis are critical because it's through the individuals that we can understand who we are as a nation. But comes along Sefer Shemos, and Sefer Shemos takes all of those potentials and all of those roots and all of those traits, and it unites them and it develops them as a nation, as one active, cohesive unit that is dedicated to God, that is pumped up and fueled by God, and that gives God the ability to be able to rule over this world. We now change from being individuals to being an Am Yisrael. And as an Am Yisrael, it's not so much about my individual contribution, it's about the klal. I never lose my importance of being an individual. I never lose my ability to be able to influence as an individual. But now I have a purpose. Now I have I have an entity that I am now a part of. And it's not just me as a stellar human being, but it's me as contributing towards this stellar entity, this national corporate entity called Am Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, called the Jewish nation. Bereshis has to feature us as individuals, whereas Shemos has to see us as a unit, as a whole, as God's unit. A nation needs its individuals, but the focus is on the entity, it's on the Am, it's on the Klal. And because it's through the Klal and its existence that we get to see the presence of God. Who it was that saved the Jewish babies, who it was that put the Jewish people back together and got married and started having children again after Paro's decrees, who said that even though Paro is killing male Jewish babies, we still have to produce babies and see what we can do to save them, that their names were Yocheved and Miriam are immaterial. For now, what's important is that there were Jews who were doing this to ensure that there was going to be a future of the Jewish nation, but not because of an individual, but because of a commitment to a klal, a commitment to an entity, a commitment to the Jewish people. It doesn't make a difference who the king was. It doesn't make a difference who the child was. It doesn't make a difference who the lady was. It doesn't make a difference about the miracles, about the things of the individual, the uniqueness of the individual, that this one could stretch their hand and this one could have a child at 130. It's not about the individuals. It's why Moshe's name doesn't appear in the Haggadah. Moshe's name is in Moshe. He took the Jewish people out of Egypt, and he doesn't appear in the Haggadah. We spend the whole night singing and dancing and celebrating. We spend the whole night singing Hallel to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and we don't mention Moshe Rabbeinu. Because the individual is not the fulcrum. The individual is not the centerpiece. It's the nation that's the centerpiece. It's the concept of the nation, and the nation is only as strong as all of its individuals. But in the end of the day, the individuals could be strong, and there is no entity called the nation. And sometimes the individual has to give up his individuality, has to give up his own personal bent for the good of the klal. Tonight's not a political speech, but what we just saw is individuals looking as individuals and not functioning as what's best for the nation, what's best for the klal. It's not about me, it's about us. It's about our God. It's about our name. That's what a name is. A name is not just who I am, but who am I in the context of my people. And that's why Sefer Shemos doesn't focus on the names. Because in that, the beginning of Sefer Shemos is teaching me how I operate and exist inside of a thing called Klal Yisrael. And that my pride has to be not in what I accomplish, but my pride has to be in what I accomplish for the Jewish people and the role I play inside of the Jewish people. And I'll tell you an amazing thing. At some point, I'm sure I'll elaborate on this. But if you look at the beginning of the book of Shemos, you will see Jewish history in the first 9 to 15 verses. You'll see our experience where we were in every single country. That we became great and mighty. We were then looked at as the enemy, as the possible fifth column. Then, as Paro said, we have to come up with a wise way to deal with the Jews. We have to come up with a final solution. And everything that's happened to us in our history, the roots of that are in the very, very opening verses of Sefer Shemos. There's a very powerful section in the beginning. It says, Vayomas Yosef Echav Chol Adorahu. Joseph dies, and his brothers die, and the entire generation dies. Then it says the Jews became prolific. And then the very next verse says, Vayokam el Chodesh HaMitzrayim, a new king arose on Egypt, Asher lo yada as Yosef, that didn't know Joseph. And our rabbis say that in that lies the entire secret of our exiles, of our suffering, of anti-Semitism. Because if you look at it carefully, why does it say that Joseph and the generation died and then immediately launch into Vayakam el Chodesh HaMitzrayim, a new king who rose on Joseph, on Egypt, who didn't know the policies that he had set? He forgot those policies and the relationships that he had with Joseph. Because what it's telling us is that as long as Joseph was alive and as long as that generation was alive, I felt good about being part of this family. I felt pride. I'm a nephew of Yosef. I'm an anicle of Yosef. I'm a grandnephew of Yosef. And then Yosef dies. And I lose my sense of pride. And I lose my sense of belonging. And though there are so many of us, Paru vayishritzu vayirbu b'ma'od ma'od v'timalei ha'aretz, the land was filled with us. We became so many. We just filled up all over. But we filled up as individuals. We didn't have that sense of pride, of belonging to a nation. And the first one really to call us and to refer to us to a nation was Paro, when he looked at us and he said, this is a mighty nation, and they will join against us with their enemies. They will become like a fifth column, and they will destroy us, because that's the way they saw us, but it's not the way we saw us. And when you don't have that sense of pride and connection, you can be a magnificent and stellar human being, but you don't have the power of the people behind you. You don't have the power of belonging, the power of an entity, the power and the energy that we have when we're connected with each other, when we are one unit called an Am Yisrael. And in the book of Shemos, the book of Shemos is not just to tell us the stories of Egypt. It's not story time. Let me tell you the story, Sonny. Let me tell you the story of what happened to you when you were a young child. That's not what it's about. It's teaching us how to become a nation, to feel connected, to feel a part and a responsibility to this thing called Klal Yisrael. Who you are, it's not critical. Who you represent and what you are a part of, that's how we make Klal Yisrael. That's how we make the Jewish nation. And that's how we keep the Jewish nation strong, by respecting protecting, worrying about, and building up Am Yisrael, the Jewish people. Okay, it's my thoughts. It's like I say, there's a lot of beautiful messages in the beginning. Spend a little time if you read through the Parsha on Shabbos, and when you read these verses of what Paro felt about the Jews and what was happening to the Jews and the ideas that he was coming up with, just think about Jewish history. And it is actually amazing that you see the roots of all of our experiences in every country that we've been in. You see them there through the psukim of the beginning of Shemos. Okay, everybody should have a beautiful, amazing, wonderful Shabbos.